Somehow Pastor Doug was able to figure out how he had something to do on the Sunday morning where the Jaguars were playing during the sermon. So I appreciate him making that happen and giving me the opportunity to talk this morning. But we're going to talk about giving today, so hold your applause, if you will, right now. There'll be a time for that, I'm sure. What we are looking at is specific stories, and if you look up there for the sermon title, it's hashtag This Is Why I Give, or you may have seen some of our social media stuff, hashtag Why I Give. And for those of you that aren't tweeting right now as we speak, I'll give you a little background on hashtags and Twitter and social media. Hashtags are a way for people to track metadata. It's a way for someone to be talking about something specific and also see who else is talking about the same thing. So if you were at home right now and you wanted to post something on Facebook or on Twitter about the Jaguars, their hashtag is hashtag BuffVJax. So if you went on Twitter, you went on Facebook, and you search that, you would only see things that people are talking about in relation to the game. So if you went on and searched hashtag This Is Why I Give or Why I Give, you would see different people. It's obviously not just Murray Hill, but things going on where people are talking about This Is Why I Give. That is what hashtags started out as, a way to kind of track and see what's happening. What hashtags have become are almost topics of what you're writing about, or sometimes sarcastic comments that have to do with what you've written on social media. So one of the things that makes me laugh, and since I'm standing up here, maybe it'll make you guys laugh, maybe not. There is something, sort of a sarcastic hashtag that currently exists that's called First World Problems. So when we talk about first world versus third world, we know third world, areas where they don't have economies developed, where the government, maybe is not strong, is not in control, whereas first world would be things like America, Canada, most of Western Europe. And the problems that an individual in America goes through, significantly different than the problems someone in a third world country would go through. So when an American gets on social media and complains about something that is very specific to them, but when you read that complaint in the grand scheme of things is really dumb, is really useless. How dare we complain about this? It's sort of a way to put a comedic spin on it. I realize this complaint in the grand scheme of life is not that big a deal, but I just want to complain about it. So I'm just going to give you a couple of these, and you can feign laughter if you want to. That's fine. These were just a couple that made me laugh, and these were all hashtagged with first world problems. So being aware of the fact that, in comparison, these are really unimportant. I still overhear people debating things that could easily be solved with Google and a smartphone. Hashtag first world problems. My credit card just expired. Now I have to update every online store and every service where I have it saved. I know, it's heartbreaking. Hashtag first world problems. A 6-inch sub is not enough, but a 12-inch sub is too much. Hashtag first world problems. My iPod won't turn on. Now I have to go find where I left my other one. Hashtag first world problems. And the last one, the gas pump I used didn't have that latchy thing on it, so I had to hold the handle down the whole time. Hashtag first world problems. So that may have been stuff that you have experienced, but obviously when we think about those things in the grand scheme of life, they're really unique to us and significantly unimportant. There's a couple different ways that we can go about talking about giving. One of those is we could pull all the financial records for the church and we could put them up there and we could see what everybody gives. But what I want you to hear today is it's not about the what, it's about the why. And so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to look at some Bible stories that are about why people give, and we're going to hear some stories from you in the pew. And don't worry, I'm not going to call on everybody. People already know who's going to tell the stories about why people here at Murray Hill give. So we're going to open with Mark chapter 12. And we are going to be in verses 41 through 44. We're going to hit a couple different spots and a couple different stories today. So you're going to be around and about, but we'll give you some page numbers and give you a chance to turn there. If you are using the Pew Bible, it's page 1017. And the Bible that I am reading of has a subtitle in here, The Widow's Offering. So we'll start with verse 41. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." So we see that widows are of significance during Jesus' ministry. And as the disciples were empowered through the Holy Spirit, one of the things that they were to do was to make sure that they were serving the widows. Because at that time, when a woman became a widow, she was sort of stuck. She was what she was. There wasn't like there were going to be any economic windfalls or anything that were going to empower her or to give her any up in society at the time. So it was really significant to Jesus. It was really significant to the disciples and in their ministry that widows were taken care of. We can read stories in Acts about how they're making sure that the widows are taken care of. So the fact that Jesus is able to contrast the widows who gave what? Very little, in comparison to the rich rulers and to the religious leaders of the day who gave what? Very much. Yet for some reason, the widow is the one that Jesus points out as saying gave the most. If you flip back just a few verses at 38, it says, "As he taught, Jesus said, 'Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplace and have the most important seats in the synagogue and the places of honor at the banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely.'" So I think it's significant to see that the religious leaders, the ones that Jesus contrasts with the widow, they in essence gave money they didn't need. They gave money out of their excess. They gave money that, had it been there, great. Had it not been there, not the end of the world. But what the widow did is she gave money that was of dire importance if we think about the fact that we are in control. Because if we are in control, we are setting our budget. We see exactly what we need because we're in control of our budget and our numbers. But when we begin to trust and when we begin to relinquish the power to God and have faith that he's going to take care of us, something that doesn't make sense, like me giving money that I think that I need, begins to make sense. And we see the widow being the model for taking what we think we need and letting it go. There are probably not many other people at this time that encountered tough financial hardships or tough financial times than did a widow or did those that are poor. So I'm going to ask Richard if he'll come up here and join me for a minute, and we're going to do just a couple questions. Grab that from Donnie.
It's so tough to be up here.
All right, so just to clarify, I know that Richard is not a widow, but when we talk about the widow and we talk about her ability to give, many of us have encountered financial hardships, have encountered times where it just doesn't mathematically look like I should be able to give. So I know that there was a time where you went through some financial hard times, some things like that. How were you able to take what was given to you in life, financial tough times, things that monetarily didn't make sense, but you were still able to participate in giving?
Okay, let me see how quickly I can define what a decision is for me, and then I can move on from there. When I use the word decision in this, it would be like deciding to get on a plane flight. So once you've decided to get on that plane, you're going to that destination whether you want to or not. So at this particular time in my life, I had decided to give a certain amount of money. And in 2008, the economy went downhill for most of us. And a lot of businesses that are very similar to mine were actually going out of business. And I lost an astronomical amount of money in a 6 to 9 month period. It was like being hit by a tidal wave. And I remember distinctively sitting down and I'm getting ready to write my tithe check. And I questioned, or it's not necessarily me, I don't think. I'm not too sure. But it came into my head, I'm making a lot less money now. In fact, I'm making about a fifth of what I was making. I should probably change the amount that I'm going to give to the church. So the decision that I came to, hence my plane flight, the decision that I came to was to not change my tithe at all. I really would have rather sacrificed other areas of my life to make sure that I could still be a part of what God was doing here in this community and in this church. And so that was a decision that I made. I'm not saying that's a decision that somebody else would have to make. But it was a decision that I made because I was absolutely all in. Now, what I have learned from that is that, first of all, God honors the decisions that we make when they are motivated for our love for Him and our love for other people. And there is no doubt a blessing that comes from it. But I held on to my business only by the grace of God. There's no other. If you know me, good night. You know it's not because I'm bright. He's amazing, and everything that He has taught me about obedience has really just brought me into that soft place of the easy yoke, which that's really where we want to be, is the easy yoke. So I think for me that just being obedient with giving to God what I've been blessed with has really just helped me understand more and more what the easy yoke is.
So you don't have to keep this second question to 140 characters, but if you were to describe why you give, what would you say?
It's funny, you and I talked about that last night. I remember when I was a little boy, I went to a Southern Baptist church, and boy, man, they were some mean people, believe it or not. But there was a sermon on tithing, and it was always about scaring people into doing what the right thing was, and I went home as a little businessman at 12 mowing yards and everything like that. I took all the money that I had, and I put it in my toy box, and I said, all right, Lord, I'm giving you this money, and I leave the bedroom, And I come back a couple hours later, and it was still there. And I was befuddled. I'm like, all right, Lord, why didn't you take this money? I just heard that you need my money. And what I learned in that moment is that it wasn't necessarily my money that God needed. And what God needs is all of me. And what He wants me to do is to not hold anything back from Him. And in some areas of my life, it may be money. In some areas of my life, it may be time. Sometimes it may be just visiting somebody at the hospital or training somebody or no telling what it may be. And so the reason why I give back to Him is because I don't know that I could ever atone for the love that He's given me. And it's a pretty amazing thing to think about.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So it's real easy, like Richard said, for someone to stand up here and say, well, you know, Jesus died for you. So how much money is the life of Christ worth? And just to paint it on with a guilt trip and just tell you how bad you are and how you're not honoring Jesus. But what I know, and depending on who are your friends on Facebook and stuff, there are different things that are posted. And one thing that I know that Jesus said repeatedly is that it's my job to love. It's not my job to convict. It's not my job to judge. It's not my job to tell anybody how awesome or awful or horrible or amazing or anything that they are based on what they give. The significant thing as followers of Christ that we need to think about is why we give. So we're going to look at a second story in Acts 4. And this is going to be in Acts 4. We're going to pick up right at the end and roll a little bit into chapter 5. So this is going to be Acts 4, verse 36. And then we'll go into chapter 5 through verse 6, and it's page 1094 and 1095 in your Pew Bible. Verse 36, Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. Now, a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Didn't it belong to you before it was sold? And after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not lied just to human beings, but to God. When Ananias heard this, he fell down and died, and great fear seized all who had heard what had happened. Then some young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. The contrast that is presented here is Barnabas, who sells a field and comes and brings everything to the feet of the apostles, and Ananias and his wife Sapphira, who come to the apostles and pretend as if they are bringing all the money that they got from the land. Something that's really significant that I think Peter says in verse 3 and 4 is a reminder that no one in the early church was requiring this of people. Peter didn't say, you know, if you're going to be a part of the church, you have to bring us everything that you sell and give it all to us. Barnabas was never required to do that. Ananias and Sapphira were never required to bring what they sold. Barnabas did it out of his joy, out of his love, out of his willingness to want to participate, out of his awe at the things that were happening in the church. Like, I have to be a part of what's happening there. Look around. See what they're doing. See how they're impacting lives. I have to be able to participate with them. Ananias and Sapphira, more like the rich leaders in the widow's story, were doing it for show. I imagine when Barnabas brought the money from the land and laid it at the apostles' feet, there were a lot of people that were like, oh man, Barnabas, that's awesome, that's great. We're so glad you did that. That's going to help so many people. And then Ananias and Sapphira are like, hey, I could use some pats on the back. I could use some love. I could use some people being awed and amazed at some of the things that I'm doing. And so they go out and sell the land, see the amount of money, and then begin thinking, well, I mean, they don't need it all. That wouldn't be very financially smart for me to just give it all away. I ought to at least take some back for me and for my wife and my needs. And so he comes to the apostles, and instead of saying, I sold my land and I'm giving 50% of it to the apostles, to you guys, so you can go help other people. Or 75%, or 10%. There was no compulsion. They weren't requiring anyone to give specific amounts. But yet he comes and lies. He comes and says, I'm giving it all to you. When in fact, he was just giving a portion. And so I think the contrast here is in the heart. It's not what they give. Because for all we know, Ananias and Sapphira could have given the money that was 5 times as much as Barnabas. It could have been a huge piece of land. Barnabas could have given $100 worth. Ananias could have been given $500 when he actually had $750. But it's not about what we give. It's about why we give. So I'm going to ask Donnie to come up and talk to us about one of his stories and one of the things that he's been able to encounter and go through when we talk about giving. So we saw the contrasting stories there in Luke. When has there been a time in your life when you feel like your giving and your participation has been more like Ananias? And then when do you think giving in your life has been more like Barnabas?
Well, I think back earlier in my career, as I moved up through the ranks in the business, I started to make a lot of money, as did my wife. We made a lot of money at that time, and we lived a comfortable life. But we didn't tithe at all. But what we would do is we'd go to the youth minister and say, how many kids need to go to camp? 3 kids? Okay, we'll pay for those 3 kids. So it was all for show, though, in my opinion. That for me, it was all for show. If there was a need, I would meet it, but I wasn't feeding just the general fund for the church. I didn't care if the electric bill stayed on. I didn't care if the staff got paid. I was just going to send those 3 kids to camp. So I was in control of exactly how that money was spent. Fast forward 2008, just like Richard, the economy crashed. The businesses that I was involved in went under. The branch that I was running, the whole region got shut down. So I went from this big dollar amount that I was making to absolutely zero. And I had no money coming in. I had a heart cath, so I had to keep Cobra insurance at the time. So it was one of those things where I had to have $770 roughly a month to pay for Cobra. So my wife and I would do odd jobs, whatever would come up, and God always provided that $770 each month. But the decision I had made at the time was, okay, I need to tithe out of that money. I need to give at least 10% of that back. So we started doing that. We started giving 10% back. But this went on for a year and a half. We were unemployed for a year and a half, both of us. So we had that coming in that we would do, and we did some really bad jobs. We spent several months in a field breaking up wood. It provided the $700. So now I've taken that lesson or that valley that we were in. I'm a little hard-headed, so it took a year and a half for me to understand what was going on. I took that valley, and I now make money again. I have a good job. My wife has a good job. But we both, the first thing we do is we write our tithe check every month or every week. And it's not just 10%. We do a little more than 10%, which is fine. But then we also still give an offering. So it's over and above. So if we need a kid to go to camp, I'm willing to do that. Because at the end of the day, I've realized it doesn't belong to me. It's not my money. It's really God's. God's provided it for me. God's giving it to me. And I need to give it back to him. I try and live more by the New Testament giving, keep what we need to live off of, and give the rest away. So that's kind of where I'm at now in my life. It's taken a long time for me to get there because I was a very selfish person. I liked my toys.
As do I. So then our second question, the same thing that we posed to Richard. Why do you give?
I give because it brings joy. If you look in the scriptures, it talks about God loves a cheerful giver. It roughly translates into a hilarious giver. So it's one of those things where you're laughing as you're giving it away. And it really does bring you joy when you're able to help people. And it's not able to help people for show, because honestly, I wouldn't be up here even doing this if you hadn't asked me to, because I really like to be in the back, not up front. So it brings me joy just to be able to help. I don't designate funds when I give funds to the church, because it doesn't matter if I agree with everything that's going on here. I agree with us reaching people for God. So if I give my money and I say, okay, this is only going to the children's department, or this is only going to the youth department, I've restricted what God can do with that money. So I choose to just give to the general fund, and if somebody comes to me and says, I need money for this, then yes, I'll give to it. It may still go through the general fund, but it's one of those things where I don't want to restrict God in what he's going to do with that money, because then the joy for me goes away. So for me, it's because it brings joy. I get to see people helped with it. I get to see people come to God with it. So for me, it's all pure joy.
Awesome. Thanks, Donnie. Now it's my turn. If you will turn with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. We're going to be looking at verses 10 through 12, and that is 1163 if you're using the Pew Bible. Verse 10 says, "Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed, and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God." This service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but is also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. So my story about giving is that I grew up in the church as a minister's kid. We used to every year get a box of envelopes that was the envelope for every week, for every Sunday that we came, and my parents would take out 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever we decided on, and we would label them. One of them would be tithe, one of them would be baseball cards, one of them would be savings, one of them, whatever they happened to be at that point in my life, that's what they were labeled as. And I would get my allowance in quarters so that I could take some and divvy it out into each one of those envelopes. And then when I decided I needed the new Dale Murphy card, I had to go check my little envelope and see how many quarters I had and if that was something I was going to be able to buy. And then each Sunday or, every other Sunday, depending on how often it was, I would drop my quarters into the plate when we did Sunday school or when we were in the service. And so my issue is that I do not take enough time to become a cheerful giver. My issue is that when I give to the church, in my head, too often, it's a bill. So it's not that I am having to decide between giving and not giving. Giving is just something that I grew up with. It's something that I always did. But I'm not able to, like verse 11 says, be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through your generosity, result in thanksgiving to God. Because when I give, I just give because it's the end of the month. And that's what I do. I don't actually take time to stop and think, holy cow, I'm able to give this amount of money to the church because God is completely taking care of me this month. Because God has supplied what I need. And because I don't do a great job at that, I don't sit down and consider, is this the right amount that God has asked me to give in October or in September or in November? Because it's just, I make this amount, so the check that I write is for this amount. And so I'm missing out on these opportunities to be generous. Because it doesn't say that God's going to bless you so that you can hang out and have a good time and tell people what a great Christian you are. It says that God's going to bless you so that you can be generous. So I'm going to give to God. He's going to honor that, bless me, so that I can then re-bless or bless up or exponentially continue to bless as I move on in my life. And so the area where I struggle is not about am I going to give or am I not going to give, but am I actually aware of why I give? Am I thinking about what has happened in my life, what has happened in the last week, in the last month or two, that has allowed me to have the opportunity to give? And so my challenge this week to myself, as I was preparing and thinking about this, is to become more aware, not of what I'm giving, but of why I'm giving. Because it's when I'm aware of why I'm giving that I become even more thankful, that I become even more aware of the sacrifice that God has made on my behalf and how little this sheet of paper with the check is, how much more I could be doing, or the opportunities that I'm allowing to pass by because, well, I already give to the church. I write it at the end of every month. I already give. So, if you have an issue, go see Mickey at MurrayHill.Church, and part of my money will probably be able to help you. So what I would ask you to do today is what I've got to experience this week. And that is not to reflect on what you give, but to think about why. Let's pray.